everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Rob, it's me, Jackie. Hi.
Oh my! Hi! I didn't expect you to be here. It's so nice to see you. You showed up.
And it's me, Diana. Hello.
Diana, you should come. Diana's sitting on the other side of the room because she's going to go get coffee in a minute because we're doing our earliest recording of all time.
The earliest ever.
So if you sense any animosity, it's just the early hour. It's not you, listener. No. We had to do some last minute scheduled change 'em ups, but it's going to be great because for us, we're very excited because it is spooky season here in New England. And I think it is, if I'm remembering our recording episode order right, this should be coming out right around the end of Halloween season. So I thought rather than just doing an old episode, I thought we'd dip into the spooky grab bag and read some spooky articles to the listeners.
I can say that mine is unequivocally very spooky.
Mine deals with one of humanity's greatest fears.
Oh, same. Mine too.
Diana, is yours also a spooky grab bag?
No.
Oh, Diana is not having this.
She's the exception to the rule. She's the person at the party that refuses to dress up at Halloween, and she's like, I'm not in costume. Even though that's exact opposite, because she always is great with costumes. But
oh well.
Episode.
But anyway, this isn't a podcast about costumes and spooky season, even though that's the theme of the episode. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic, except for, like I said at the top, this week, because we're going into a spooky grab bag where we go into the deep depths of research and find articles that don't necessarily have a coherent theme, though we're pretending they do this time. In this episode that I think I'm going to call Spooky Grab Bags to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, I love that.
I thought about that on a car ride the other day, and I went, "Wah!" And Tanya goes, "What is it?" And I said, "I thought of the title for the episode."
That's actually really good.
All right, so we are going to each be sharing an article that we pull out of our metaphorical spooky grab bag and discussing it just like we normally do on the show, but we don't have any sort of overarching theme. We just sort of do these for fun. But we tend to pick articles that fall into the category of, Jackie, you're pretty much, it's an animal. Like if it's a grab bag, it's an animal article.
It's either animals or data collection, usually.
Yeah. Mine are usually about school stuff, like good behavior game or, video modeling sometimes. Dana, what do you find your theme to be? I feel like you the least, you like always are finding something very interesting, but not necessarily like, oh, it's this article, therefore Diana, like Jackie and I always do.
I have a lot of varied interests.
Okay. Can't pin Diana down.
Yeah, you can't pin her down. But hers today is a Diana-centric article. So
okay. Well, why don't we get started? Jackie, why don't you kick us off with the terrifying tale of you can tell us the story.
The article I'm going to discuss today is Interobserver agreement among a staff member and visitors at a wolf sanctuary. Because wolves are the animal that humans fear the most.
Ooh,
and that's why
I think you meant a werewolf sanctuary.
And that's why they're scary. So this was by Ackner and Jacobs, and it was 2024 in Behavior Analysis and Practice. And just so you know, this wolf sanctuary is near our house.
So it is?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of. It's in Massachusetts. It's in Ipswich. So I think we should go.
We could do that. That's not that near, though. Ipswich is not that near.
Can make it a day trip.
It's a day trip distance.
Well, I love this, and I've never been there, but now after reading this article, I really want to go. And I really hope I get picked. So let me tell you about the article.
We'll do it for the podcast, and we can write it off on our taxes. It'll be great.
Yeah. So the intro really starts with kind of laying out why this study is important. And they start off by giving like the general, we all know this to be true, but those that work in behavior analysis and in animal training usually are more likely to collect data and analyze that data with their animal, clients than other animal professionals in the field. And, they suggest that using this data can really help enrich the well-being of the animals and could help increase their well-being, to look at, are they increasing in rates of stereotypy because they're unsatisfied? Are they engaging in play activities with the enrichment objects that they're there? And so there's a lot of different ways that they can use data. But animal caretakers say that time and resources limit their ability to take data effectively, which makes sense, right? Because they're not everyone's giving them all the funding to be like, I'm going to take data on this bear and how many times he walks back and forth from one side of the fence to the other. And so this study really wanted to look at how this issue can be resolved by using citizens that come and observe the animals. So like citizen science.
Cool.
So I love that idea. A previous study in 2012 by Williams, I had to look at this. They asked visitors to record data for 8 behaviors of otters in an England zoo. And sadly, they said the results didn't work because the visitors ignored the instructions. And they typically took data for longer than they were supposed to. They were only supposed to take data in 30-second intervals, but they would take data longer, which ruined the Interobserver agreement that they were looking for. But I mean, I don't know if that is when I read that, I was like, I wouldn't know how to do that being an untrained citizen, right? Taking 30-second bins. So maybe it was the data collection procedure. And I think that's what the authors also in this study also thought, because what they did is a tally, an instant, they did a tally count. So they wanted to say, could untrained visitors continuously record 2 behaviors for multiple wolves during a 50-minute educational presentation, or 1 behavior, but continuously? And could they get 80% agreement with a staff member and at or above a 0.6 kappa score for that Interobserver agreement, saying that it was, valid? So that's pretty exciting. They're like, hey, can we use these visitors that just come and watch the show? So participants were recruited from a pool of adult visitors to a wolf sanctuary called Wolf Hollow in Ipswich. I'm totally going to be there soon. And they were informed of the study, and then they consented, and they had 23 participants. But in the end, only 10 of the 23 served as participants because the rest of them dropped out due to maybe their smartphone not working, or they stopped taking data. Like there's a variety of things, but which makes sense, right? Because they're not there to fulfill the research study. They're here to come and watch this 50-minute presentation about the wolves.
Sure.
So that makes sense when I read that. So the observation occurred in an outdoor observation area during a 50-minute presentation. They made it very clear that there was 2 layers of glass that enclosed the area so that we could not touch the wolves. I like that they had to put that in there. Like, I wonder if someone asked, like, could we actually interact with the wolves? No, you can't.
No
you can't.
Great idea. Go stick your hand right in their face. They love that.
So there was 3 separate enclosures, and they housed 9 total wolves. They had 2 adults and 3 wolf pups, and then in one enclosure, and then in the other 2 enclosures, they had just 2 adult wolves. And so what they did for data collection is they had a data collection procedure that participants could download from their smartphone. Once they consented to the procedure, they downloaded this app on their smartphone, and they used that to take data. And the only thing that they had is they just had a picture of what they wanted, what the authors wanted them to take, and then like a plus minus so they could just tally the instances. And the 2 behaviors that they had were scent rolling, which was the single instance. And it was like when the wolf would lay down flat and roll its cheek over something on the ground. And then if they had 2 behaviors that they were supposed to take data on, it was scent rolling and then urinary marking, where, the wolf would walk past whatever they were sniffing and then pee on it. So they didn't. Yeah. So there you go. So they had a picture of both these things. The picture of the scent marking is kind of awesome. It's just like a wolf leg, up in the air. I love that. And so they didn't give them the name. They gave them the name and the picture, but they didn't give them the operational definition.
Gotcha.
What they were going to look at. It was just the picture. Another thing that they didn't do, and I think it would have been cool, but maybe too far removed, is like why these behaviors were important. Like they kept saying like, oh, it's important to think about enrichment, but I just don't know. And I'm interested, right? Because I love it. Like, why would they engage in the scent marking and urinary, or scent rolling and urinary marking? Why would that be important for them to take data on? So they didn't say that, but that would be cool if they did. So the observers were expected to continuously record the scent rolling and use the behavioral sampling when they saw the scent rolling and urinary marking occurring together. So they had 2 shows every weekend at 12 and 2 if you want to go. And so each group was randomly assigned either they're going to take data on one behavior alone or the 2 behaviors together. And then whatever one was chosen in the morning, they would do the opposite in the afternoon.
Mm.
Yep. And so the participants were assigned to one of 2 groups. And the first author served as the independent observer. And I guess this first author worked at Wolf Hollow for a long time and gave the presentation, was very familiar with the wolves, which is probably why they're doing this study here. Because as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, cool. How can I get involved? Turns out I have to volunteer for a long time somewhere. So that's what they did. And so for the IOA, they used exact agreement for the IOA. So the presentation was divided into 1-minute intervals. And during those 1-minute intervals, they looked to see if they calculated the same. And they also did an average mean IOA to calculate and compare across the different groups. And so for the kappa, they used each 1 minute and they scored it as occurrence or non-occurrence. Mm-hmm. So that's all they did. They did it across 5 consecutive weekends, which what I didn't tell you. And what they found was that IOA was really high across all the behaviors, above 80% across scent plus, and marking. And the kappa was really high when you had the single instance of behavior, when you're recording that single instance, but didn't reach 0.6 when there were the double behaviors. And one reason that the authors suggest that was the case is because for those double behaviors, they saw lower baseline rates across those behaviors during these particular observations, what could have affected the kappa. But these results are so cool because they show that untrained visitors, just random people that are coming to watch this wolf presentation, could help, track these specific behaviors with basically no training, right? They just had to download this app on their phone and look at a picture. And they also said that they could extend this study to clinical settings for parents and professionals. If you wanted them to be part, you could, have them take a picture of a response. You wouldn't have to go through like all this training, and they could see if this would be helpful there. So the data show that easy data collection and the picture of the target behavior can be helpful in data collection. They suggested a component analysis on whether the name or the picture or both are more salient. I think that just seems like a researcher question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like if you want this to work, you should probably include both. But okay, when I read that, I was like, you have to include that to make it a little bit longer. And one thing they didn't think of, which was a limitation, is that even though they downloaded this application on everyone's iPhones, they didn't think about the rate of attrition due to competing responses. Like during this 50 minutes, people are going to be looking at their phones. They're going to be toggling between taking pictures because they're actually here to see the wolves. They're going to be on social media. They're going to be getting texts. And one thing that they didn't realize is that when people toggled between the different parts of their phone, some of the data collection shut down, and that's why they.
Oh yes, yeah. That is always like a killer when you just, because if you're a researcher, you test these things, but you can't necessarily beta test with all the citizens and all the apps and all the ways you can use a phone. That just feels
right.
Yeah.
And so they were like, whoops, that's something that we didn't do great on.
It's like a commercial product where they're like, we're going to pay for groups to do these things. It's like, we need this for, yeah.
Yeah, so that's it. So that was my brief spooky grab bag, and it was right off the top. Wow. It was 2024. I didn't skim very far.
Terrifying. Well, thank you, Jackie. That was certainly spooky.
I love wolves.
More discussion of wolves.
Yeah, I love
wolf
wolves.
data.
I know. I wanted to hear more about the wolves.
I know.
There used to be way more wolves around here, but we killed them all because they were eating our farms, because everyone used to farm around here.
They're coming back.
That's cool. Deers are all over the way.
Yeah,
We saw a deer crossing the street the other day, and it's just like, I'm just going to take my time. I'll just go. I'm like the middle of the suburbs, not even like super wooded area.
Yeah, but
we need the wolves. Eat the deer.
We need the wolves. We need the wolves to eat the deer. We need the deer to eat the ticks. Do you know how they... No, I'm sorry.
Wait, the deer eat the ticks? I thought the deer just had the ticks.
No, I think they just have the ticks.
So we don't want the deer. The deer serve no purpose.
No.
Get out of here, you deer.
They're beautiful.
I can watch Bambi at home. I don't need to see you.
The wolves, I think, control the bunny population.
Oh, there are a lot of bunnies.
Yeah, there are a lot. Well, there initially are a lot of bunnies, and then you'll notice that there aren't as many bunnies.
Mm.
That's why.
Where'd they go? The wolves ate them? Or coyotes? Or bears? Oh my.
Yeah.
Those are the animals that live near us.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jackie. Diana, do you want to go next? Because mine is also very spooky. And as we all know, when you're telling spooky grab bags in the dark, you don't want to just go spooky to spookier. You want to kind of take a little break in between. It's a tension release, right? That's how you make sure this episode is truly terrifying.
I can try.
Diana is facing her greatest fear, being awake on the weekend early.
Shocking.
I know. When you said this time period, I was like, really?
Well, notice that I didn't say this time period.
Oh, that's true. You didn't.
Yeah. Part of the reason is because I was trying to take a lot of wolf data on my phone last night.
Mm.
But I also got distracted in doing so by this app called Cake Sort.
Oh.
And Cake Sort has gripped me and my attention for the past week, I think. And it's kind of embarrassing, but now I'm just telling everyone that I love the game Cake Sort, where you sort cakes.
No, I have never even heard of it.
Sounds really great.
Yeah. It really keeps you going. So yeah, I've stayed up too late every single night this week trying to sort cakes. And
Yeah, you should call the bakery and get a real job doing that.
I don't think that's going to be as satisfying as this is. There's like an animation when you sort them and they roll around in a certain way, and it's like really, really cool.
I'll have to see it the next time I see it.
Just keep playing to try to get that awesome animation to happen, basically.
Oh.
Yeah, but today was going to be my catch-up day on my sleep, but instead I'm here.
Great. Well, please.
Oh, you want me to talk about content? You want me to talk about behavior analytics?
We do need to fill
research?
A certain amount of percentage has to be actually related to research, yes.
Okay, well, some people might find my article to be quite spooky, in fact, because it is talking about learning how to graph single subject research design using Microsoft Excel.
That's not
Microsoft
scary.
Excel. Woo!
That's fun.
I think it's fun. And this is an article that's right up my wheelhouse, but I didn't write it. Instead, it was written by Mondati, Reeve, Vladescu, DeBar, and Thomas. And it's titled Remote Teaching of A/B Graphs in Microsoft Excel.
Oh, that's great.
And it was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice very recently, 2024. And the first author, Mondati, it was her thesis, her master's thesis, which I always think is just cool when people get their master's thesis published. So rock on, way to go, Mondati. And I have long had an interest in talking about graphing because I really like graphing. A lot of us in this field are here because we want to work with individuals with disabilities, and that is how I got into this field. But I also am kind of a sciencey nerd in that way too, in that I love talking about graphs and I love talking about how experimental design works. So this is not the first study that has looked at teaching someone how to graph, but there's only a handful of them out there. And so we keep adding to this smallish body of literature. And this one chose to extend the current literature in a couple ways, but let me tell you a little bit about what already exists out there. Because we may have talked about one of these in the past. Or actually, we may have talked about one that I'm not about to mention right now. But the ones that they highlighted were Mateer et al. 2008, where they looked at teaching graphing for Prism. And then Berkman, 2019, Haysid, used Prism, and they compared video modeling with voiceover to enhanced written instructions, which is a super cool article, but would be a little bit longer one to review. In that article, they did a comparison between those two, and they found that video modeling with voiceover was more effective at teaching the skill by a tiny bit. But the participants preferred the enhanced written instructions, which I have seen similar things anecdotally bear out when I've attempted to use these types of models for teaching my students as well.
When you say enhanced written instructions, Diana, what exactly are they usually referring to? Or
like a fancy checklist.
Okay.
Yeah, it might have pictures on it or links in it or something like that.
So I'm thinking like it's a screenshot, and I drew on the screenshot, putting arrows like now click this button or put the data in this box. But I was just curious.
I'd have to go back and look at Berkman. It probably had screenshots, but both of those were for Prism, right? And Prism, I don't know if you've used Prism, Rob, but it's like so great. Like once you understand how to put the data in, it just it's like, oh, you meant this beautiful graph, and it just makes you a beautiful graph. It's like so easy compared to Excel, which is not easy, not intuitive in many ways, and like defaults to kind of the opposite of what I think we usually want for behavior or single case graphs. So it's like great that you did it in Prism, but what about everybody else who doesn't have access to this expensive program? What should we do when people are trying to use Excel? So Lahardy and colleagues 2021 used Excel, and they had ABA master students use video tutorials, a graphing workbook, which I will explain, and an itemized checklist to teach them how to make graphs. And that was successful. However, in the social validity feedback for that study, the participants said they liked it, but they really wanted to access that itemized checklist while they were watching the videos instead of after, which was how that study was set up. So put a pin in that. Also, just so everyone knows, there was one that was conducted with special education graduate students, Lowe and Starling, 2009, but very little has been done outside of the behavior analytic research. And then another study that they wanted to highlight, which was Mondati et al. 2017, which was not a behavior analytics study, but they were attempting to teach graphing. And they wanted to note that in the baseline, they said the participants were quote unquote lazy and lacked knowledge. Our current authors clearly found this to be absolutely hilarious that was published. And so they wanted to...
The Journal of Rude Comments.
I don't know. So they wanted to make sure that...
The Journal of Subjective Analysis.
that they gathered some objective baseline, able to talk about it in objective terms. And so the purpose of the current study was to fix that tiny little thing in Lahardy where they had access to the two things at once, to checklist of the videos at once, and then also to look at this with undergraduate population, which to me is kind of the bigger extension there, right? So they recruited graduate and undergraduate students, I believe, but only undergrads were participants in the study. They had 6 people who showed interest and 3 who ended up completing the study. 1 had to leave midway through for reasons outside the study. And then 1 did not reach mastery criteria within the 6 weeks and decided not to continue. And I will come back to them. The setting, it was all done remotely via Zoom, which is awesome because you could do it anywhere, right? And then when Lahardy published their study, in their supplemental materials is the link to the video that they used. So it was just one video. It's 60 minutes long, and it had a bunch of information in it. And so they just used it because it's, as long as you have the link, it's on YouTube. And so you can just access it. So they used that. They didn't even have to make their own video for this study. They just used that one. And then they made a few changes to the Lahardy original checklist. And I really like what they did. They cleaned up a couple things that I guess they thought were confusing, but then they also added in hyperlinks into the checklist. So it would have been like a digital Microsoft Word document, I assume. And when you clicked on it, it would take you to that spot in the video.
Oh, so they bookmarked the video and then
yeah,
that's great.
I know. Isn't that super cool? I just loved that. And I want to figure out how to use that for myself in the future.
I've started using a lot more hyperlinks in documents, especially if like, when you have like a behavior plan that's getting really long or in multiple sections or multiple data sheets. And I just started having almost like a table of contents. Or when I do checklists for procedures, like this will take you to the thing. So if you can't remember what I'm talking about, click the link and it takes you to the visual. And then it's just so easy to have everything because you can everything's in the cloud now. It just makes it so hard to organize, and everyone organizes their files differently. And it's just, this is the document that will get you to everything you need. I do love that idea in all these ways.
Where is the cloud?
It's like all around us. You're living in it.
It's an ether.
It's going through you as we speak. All that data.
So in the checklist, they had several different items, and I'm not telling you all the items because it's kind of boring, and you can probably kind of guess what they are, right? But they were broken into 6 sections, which were how to make the following things: the data plots, the graph panel, the axes, the phases, the data call out, which means like, how are you going to identify, like, are you going to use arrows? You're going to use a key, right? How do you identify what the data paths are? And then the aesthetics of the graph, which is a word I like to say. Now, let me note as well for you that all of this was done with just teaching an A-B graph. Baseline, treatment, A-B. That's all that we were doing here, okay? The design was a non-concurrent multiple probe design, and our dependent variable was percentage of steps on the checklist completed correctly. And they did have them submit like their final graph to them as they made it, but they actually, the real data were recording the video zooms and then watching them again, is my understanding, to see how and when they did all of these varying components of the checklist. Although I feel like you could like see it in the graph at the end, but it sounded like they watched the video to gain this information,
okay,
which seems long and boring. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what they did there. So for all the sessions at the beginning, the participants got a graph workbook and a raw data set. So they gave them some data that needs to go on a graph, right? And then, like I said, the Zoom session was recorded. They received an email 5 minutes before the session with this workbook in it, and the contents of the workbook were different, and more information came in the workbook in the treatment, like the independent variable components were inside this workbook. But in baseline, it just had instructions, a mock data, and an example graph. So even in a baseline, they got like kind of a lot to go on, I would say. So they got all that 5 minutes before the session. They got the Zoom link at least within 24 hours before the session, it said. And then to note too, the raw data sets were never repeated. So every session, it was a new set of data. And then they capped the session at 1 hour. They also viewed this as an upgrade from Lahardy in that their sessions could go on and on and on, such that in Lahardy, their sessions averaged 106 minutes.
Wow. Painful.
That is over an hour and a half to make a graph in Excel. So, yes, I'm glad you capped it at an hour. That is rough. They ran these sessions 3 times a week. In baseline, as I said, no feedback was given. They got this workbook. They're like, do your best. And that's it. And then they did it for as long as they could. And they said, whenever you want to stop or you think you're done, you can't keep going, turn in your graph. And then treatment looked the same, except that in baseline, they also got the itemized checklist that I talked about before, the link to the video, the hyperlinks were in the checklist. They could like go back and forth and check on the video. And once the treatment got rolling, when they received that email with all of the book and stuff in it, it also contained an itemized list of errors that they had made in the previous session. So that had a feedback piece to it too. And that was it. So it was never live feedback, although the person the experimenter was there, but they like turned their camera and their sound off and they were just like monitoring the session. So never live feedback, only via email, which I don't, that's a whole other episode, whether that's effective or not. Mastery criteria, 90% for 3 sessions, or at the 6-week mark, they asked them if they wanted to keep going if they hadn't met mastery. And then they got IOA, blah, blah, blah. It was all good. One session was 75%. Otherwise, it was all like high 90s. Don't know what happened that one time. They didn't say. And then they did social validity to, try to make sure they had addressed Lahardy's concerns. And they used the treatment acceptability rating form revised, the TARF-R, which I've heard of a few different times, right? And I'm starting to hear about it a little bit more. So I just wanted to highlight that for listeners out there who might be wanting to think about a sort of a preset social validity scale. You might want to take a look at this. So it has 17 items on it. And they ask about things like the reasonableness of the study, the effectiveness, the side effects, the disruption of your time, your willingness to participate, and your understanding of what happened. So in case anyone's like looking for something like that, it does exist. Results looked pretty good. Everyone was super low in baseline. They got less than 5%. Basically, they like opened Excel. That was like it. I think they were just like, I don't know how to do this. I'm not doing it. Right? I'm done.
That's what I would do.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
These are APs.
These are undergrads. And they were, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you that. Some of them were like in computer sciences. Some of them were in psychology and business, maybe were the 3 who participated.
Okay. I'm just trying to remember, like, when did I learn how to make graphs? I don't remember being.
I didn't learn this in undergrad.
I didn't learn this in undergrad either. I learned it in grad school. In undergrad, basically, I learned statistical analysis.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you had the SBSF lab and psych.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. So I think they were just like, teach me, please. I don't want to sit here with a blank Zoom screen and not knowing what to do, which is, again, like we just said, probably what we would do as well. So they had a staggered baseline across participants, 3 to 5 baseline sessions, and then treatment. Treatment took 3 to 4 treatment sessions for everybody. Everyone saw an immediate increase. Only one time did someone meet the 60-minute max, and that was Natalie. Her first session, she maxed out at 60 minutes, and then she got an 80%. So it still was a really clear increase for her. After that, she increased to 100%. Andrea, her first session was 40%. And then after that, she increased to 100%. So in that one, it may have been, we don't know if it was practice that was required or the feedback that she got in the email, right? And then for Susan, once Susan saw what to do, she was like, oh, got it. And she just immediately like jumped to basically 100% after that. So she just needed to be told what to do, right? They also looked at the session duration, and it decreased for everyone from 50 to 60 minutes in the first training session to 15 to 35 by the last training session, which is still kind of long if you ask me, given what they were trying to do. But it was definitely a pretty clear decrease. Now, I know, remember before I said there was this 4th participant who, after 6 weeks, they still hadn't met mastery criteria, and they asked them if they wanted to continue, and they said, no. I don't know why we don't get those results, because they have 6 weeks of data for that person.
Yeah.
And it seems to me they would be represented here as an example of this not being effective.
I don't know.
I don't know either, unless they also were like, and don't include my data.
It's possible, but then I think they would just not have mentioned them, or they would have mentioned at the beginning, like, one participant withdrew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
right?
the data is not, they're not shown.
Yeah. Because, we don't want to perpetuate the file drawer effect where data that don't look great don't get published. And I feel like all these 3 sets of data look great. So having one where you're like, and it didn't work for this person, future research should show why, to me would be fine. Like, as a reviewer, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's okay. So I don't know what really happened there.
What really happened?
No, I didn't mean that. I want to see the data. Show me the data. Their social validity looked great. Everyone's like, I love this. I'd use it again. Then limitations. I kind of love this as well, because for 2 of the 3 participants, they said, we don't really like the video, right? They thought that the video reviewed things in like a weird order. Like they talked about the y-axis, and then they went and did some other stuff, and then they went back. And then you can actually see the timestamps in the checklist provided, and it jumps around. It's like, go to minute 4, now go to minute 16, now go back to minute 4. But I just love that our current authors are like, yeah, the video that we use that we didn't make, they didn't like that part. So it's like not even like what they did. And then they also mentioned the limitation that it's possible the participants could have looked at other materials between sessions. This is always a concern for these types of, like Zoom recording based studies.
You're
totally.
A participant that went out of their way to learn it another way.
Right. I mean, we don't really see evidence of that, but that's always something that comes up. There's also possible reactivity effects here because even though the experimenter never said anything, they were like there on Zoom. But, And then they also mentioned Guinness et al. Hi, Kendra. And the way in which they approached this, which was via like a teaching a similar type of skill via like a Moodle or an online lesson module, which is kind of cool and like another approach. So I really like this study. My only other thing that I don't think that they really mentioned is I don't know why they just taught an A-B graph, because we don't use an A-B graph with the exception of stacking it up to become a multiple baseline graph, right? And on its own, it's not experimentally sound. I guess it's just the simplest approach, right? So I guess that's why they started there, but it's definitely not an end point. To me, it's like just a piece of what we would actually use in behavior analysis. So it seems a little strange to me that they just taught the A-B and we're like, and we're done. But
well, when it comes to teaching people to make a graph, I guess depending on the end goal is you are going to be a researcher and you need to be able to publish and show experimental control, like strong experimental control. Yes, you're right, Diana. It's not the end goal. However,
it's quite spooky.
When you think about who do we want to be using graphs more often, we're thinking about either practitioners or consultants working with people who are just going to use a graph to say, I want to do something and make sure it worked, which means they're almost exclusively going to use A-B graphs. Because, for example, in a school, which is where I mostly am, if I can get a good A-B graph from a number of teachers, like I'm very excited about that. And the idea that I'd say, and now we're going to withdraw the treatment and see what happens. They would like, why would you ever do that? Like, clearly we're all happy with the results. So there are going to be, I think, more people who just want to say, I did nothing, or I did whatever I was doing, and then I added a treatment. What happened? So I do think there is an A-B utility in more real life. However, we know it's not an experimentally strong design. It is probably a more realistic design of utility. Plus, what would be the added steps you'd need to do to add in the A and then another B, right? It's just repeat the steps you did already and just keep doing them ad nauseum.
Technically, yeah.
So,
but, I get that it's like a unit, right? It's like this least common denominator of graphing, right? But then maybe you could include as a generalization, like, okay, now can you make it into an AB? There's an idea.
There you go. I'm shocked it took so long to train people to make these graphs. Because I know one of my back lockdown COVID training activities I did was teaching behavior technicians to make just simple graphs using Google Sheets. And we didn't do like A-B graphs. So, they had, a couple data points. All they needed to do is make a graph with axes that have titles, because Google Sheets is kind of crappy at doing anything fancy other than just, look, it's a graph and I can put the data in and the graph keeps updating over time. So I taught them to make auto-updated graphs. And it took, 45 minutes or so for a good chunk of the participants. I didn't take data, I didn't have consent or anything. So I'm just kind of sharing anecdotally. So I'm kind of shocked. I'd like to see, I'd love to look at their graphs. Like, how fancy were these graphs that they were taking this amount of time to teach? But I was also teaching adults, so individuals.
Well, these were adults.
Yeah, but I was teaching like older adults who had more experience in the field. I wasn't teaching undergraduate students. So, mileage may vary in terms of how much they've seen some of these programs before. Yeah.
And I think it was just the one graph maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe they had to do multiple, but I'm pretty sure it was just
or it was like a huge data set. Because like I know when I make a graph, if I have, I got to go through like a month of data because someone just dumped it in my lap. That takes a while.
Yeah, we don't included in the article itself is not an example of that. It has several examples in it, which is awesome, but not the raw data.
You just make it like, here, it's 6 points, 3 baseline, 3 treatment, like that. I'm curious why it took so many sessions and weeks and hours to.
I think they were watching the videos.
Yeah, so that would add time in.
Yeah, and they never removed the videos. That was
okay.
Unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, super cool study. Nice work.
All right. Well, because we don't want to scare everyone too much, let's take a little break, and then when we come back, we'll wrap up with a spooky final article. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back doing our spooky grab bags to tell in the dark. And we're coming up to the last article. But before we do that, I don't want to terrify you by forgetting to remind you that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening, you're able to earn a learning credit. All you need are the special code words. And I'll give you the first one. It's clown, CLOWN. Is it a fun clown like that makes you laugh, or is it a spooky clown like the It clown or that Terrifier clown who chops you all up or eats you in the sewer? Yeah, oh, clowns. They're having a resurgence. Is disgusting and creepy. It doesn't really matter which clown you're imagining. Just type in clown. All right.
I was for Halloween for much of my childhood.
Why?
It wasn't like scary then, you know?
Well, okay. That doesn't seem like your style of costume.
My mom made all my Halloween costumes when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Were you like a Pagliacci clown, or you were like a
I don't know what that
Ringling
is.
Brothers, like an Italian?
Like Italian,
Yeah.
yes, like that. Yes.
Okay.
I think I had like a ruffle collar.
Oh yeah, those are.
It was like
creepier.
a full, like a body jumpsuit thing that had polka dots on it,
Oh,
and like elastic at the hands and the feet, and then it had like a ruffle collar.
ooh, that seems scarier.
No,
to me.
I was cute. I was cute.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. All right, so finally, our last spooky article, and this deals with one of humanity's most terrifying activities, which is public speaking. Ooh, and the article I'm discussing is Laske and DiGennaro Reed's 2024 Java article. So, like, do speech disfluencies matter? A parametric evaluation of filler sounds and words.
It's a really good title.
Which is very much a Flo DiGennaro Reed title. I love it so very much. So thank you. Thank you for the title and for the research as well. I also appreciated both. This was about public speaking, which is a topic we've talked about a number of times on the show as people who do a lot of speaking. I guess technically this isn't exactly public speaking in that we're just by ourselves, but it is in the sense that it will be going out to people. And we do also do a lot of public speaking in our day jobs if we present at conferences. So we do care about the craft of the public speaking. So I'm very, very curious to learn what does the research tell us about these filled sounds and filled words that we often add into our speech. And also because this is a cool example of using a parametric evaluation for a socially valid topic that everyone has to deal with at some point in their life. I know when I'm looking at the task list and it's like, talk about a parametric evaluation, I always struggle to find one that is that interesting. I know there's a number of them out there, but I don't see as many. This one I thought was a very cool one. I might throw into my supervision bag, as we're going to talk about parametric analysis, and we're going to talk about something that isn't typically thought of as behavior analytic work, just to sort of kill two birds with one stone with expanding the knowledge of a trainee. So public speaking, if you don't do it, you're probably going to have to. If you look at the National Association of Colleges and Employers, they had a job outlook paper in 2023 that said 50% or about 50% of employer respondents want to hire people who have strong vocal verbal communication skills. And the Indeed, that like a job group, Indeed group, says public speaking is an important job skill. So if you say, I want a job where I never have to talk in public, you are cutting yourself off of about half the available jobs. And there are plenty of times in any career where you will be expected to speak in front of others. Now, public speaking is a common fear. It's usually listed as like one of people's top fears. And it is also one that for many people, they are scared at one point in their life, and it just lasts throughout their entire life. Because in some ways, you can't dodge public speaking. But I'm sure we all know plenty of people who say, I'm terrified of public speaking. But like Pat Fryman says, I think for all of us, it's not that we're not scared or nervous of talking in public. It's that we've learned how to talk in public, even while nervous. But when we look at research on, well, how do I get better at public speaking? Most of the research is on, let's cut down how often you say vocal verbal speech disfluencies. So filler sounds like, So that's usually where we see this study. So like Mancuso and Miltenberger, 2016 is an example. And we talked about a few of these on a few previous episodes. And usually the treatment is some sort of like competing response training or awareness training to reduce disfluencies. Sometimes awareness training is the only thing used, but it's basically just sort of helping them, like teaching a cue to attend to the fact that someone is making the sounds. And then you see a decrease in those disfluencies.
I think we reviewed Meg Heineke's article on this as well in our other episode.
Yeah. And then a lot of times what they'll do is after they've done their treatment, they'll have an external rater evaluate like video of the speech before and after the training. And they'll look at a number of factors like how comfortable was the speaker? Did they seem nervous? Did they make good eye contact? Were they using gestures? Did they have a purpose in their communication? And overall, like, how do you think their public speaking is? And a lot of times you'll see these raters saying, yep, after treatment, they certainly said and these disfluencies really dropped. However, weirdly enough, you get kind of mixed results as to whether anyone thinks now this person is a better public speaker. Sometimes they say, yes, they do seem like better public speakers. Sometimes the after condition, the raters are saying they seemed a lot more nervous or they didn't move their hands very much. So there's kind of a weird possible paradox of all this research on cutting down disfluencies may not actually result in better public speaking. So is it a valuable thing to teach? And Laske and DiGennaro Reed had done an earlier study in 2022 on public speaking performance. They didn't actually teach a decrease in disfluencies. They just taught them, like, here's what you should do in public speaking. They did some awareness training, so people like were paying attention to sort of what they were doing while the speaking. And they saw that those external raters actually perceived the speakers were affected in most categories, even in low numbers of speech disfluencies, even though they actually weren't any better in this area. Like the rate of speech disfluency before and after training was the same, but the perception was they were much more fluent than they had been, these external raters. So, and it was just after like a public speaking training. So just learning about the context of public speaking training was pretty effective. So the question comes up, all right, so we spend a lot of time and a lot of previous research talks about these speech disfluencies. And I know most people get scared and they think they're going to say, I remember the first year of our podcast, I spent a lot of time editing out. And this paper makes me rethink that whole year of my life because I guess I didn't need to do that.
We get better. You just outsource that to someone else.
We definitely have. We have Dan, our editor now. Dan. So I'm not doing all that work. But I also think we probably got better at it. Although I have no data to support that. I could go look at it, but I don't want to.
Zoom can now calculate that for you. Did I already talk about that?
No.
Show?
Number of ums and ahs?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So if you record yourself talking in Zoom, it now can give you, at least my work version of Zoom can give you metrics on how you did in like a whole variety of areas, including filler words.
Okay. So maybe this research is easier than it used to be.
Yeah. We could feed in old episodes.
Oh, you know what? All right, fun study idea.
Yeah.
Let's save it for the end though. Let's talk about. I want to talk about Laske and DiGennaro Reed. Then we'll talk about our hypothetical study. So the question becomes: is speech disfluency actually an important part of the public speaking process? If we cut down disfluencies, are we actually teaching people to talk in weird, robotic mannerisms that nobody likes? And the question comes up, well, all right, if we're going to be trying to teach people about public speaking, we really need to be aware, is disfluency training or is fluency training actually going to lead to adverse effects? Or is it a skill that nobody cares about? There's no social validity around the speech disfluencies when it comes to other aspects of public speaking that may be more important. And there is some previous research from the 60s. Jones and Azrin did a stuttering study where they sort of taught people to speak to the beat of a metronome. And if there were too short an interval and the people got too good at talking along with the pattern of the metronome, raters perceived them as sounding really unnatural, even though the goal of the study to speak with fewer stuttering pauses was met. The results actually were not socially valid, which would be really frustrating to hear. Like, you did all this great work and now everyone thinks you sound weird. So we should know that, because it's not good to treat people and then leave them in a worse state than they started.
Do you know, in college, I could talk in iambic pentameter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Parties.
It seems as though I could align my speech.
That's creepy.
Did you do it right now?
Yeah, I just did it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really...
That was really, really fun.
Yeah, everyone, audience, you can't see the smug look of satisfaction on Diana's face,
I can feel it.
but it's there.
Oozing out of me right into the cloud.
And we also don't know, when people do these kinds of disfluency decrease studies, they use a lot of, maybe habit reversal or the awareness training. They often just set these goals of like 75 to 80% of baseline rates of disfluency. We're going to decrease by that amount, but nobody knows whether that's actually a useful amount of decrease. So for example, if you don't have that many disfluencies, it's barely a decrease. If you have a lot of disfluencies, is 75 to 80% even enough? So the point of the study here was to look at disfluency. Does it matter what kind of disfluency, right? Is there a difference between filler sounds like versus filler words like, whatever, all of those? Or as I was saying, just sort of these phrases, these kind of stock phrases that we throw in a lot. I say apparently. I don't know if it's considered a filler word necessarily in the research, but I say it all the time. Does anyone care?
One of my podcasters says frankly.
Frankly.
All the time.
Yeah. So is that a filler word? Does anyone care about filler words the way they might care about filler sounds? So how do different rates and topographies of disfluency actually affect perceptions of effectiveness in public speaking? So that is the background information that led to this study, because we want to know, does it matter? What matters? How much does it matter, if at all? So they did an online survey. They had 210 participants. They did a lot of great demographic questions in this study, which we're going to bring up to a limitation at the end, or the authors bring up in their limitation section. They had a video of Laske doing a 3-minute speech about his dream vacation, and it was scripted. So Laske was doing the same gestures and the same components that are often rated well in good public speaking. He had started with a greeting. He had an opening hook, introduced the topic. My dream vacation would be... He used anecdotes, used eye contact, gestures, used effective transition statements. He summarized the content at the end. He had a closing hook and a closing statement. And he did it in a studio, a university studio with a teleprompter. He wore nice clothes. So he did all the things that would make for good public speaking. And they did 7 parametric speech variation videos. The only difference between all of the videos, or at least as much as they could control some of the natural variation that comes from doing the talk over and over and over again, was the filler words and sounds. So that varied per video. Everything else stayed the same. So they had 7 different videos. One had no filler sounds or words per minute. One had 2 filler sounds per minute. One had 5 filler sounds per minute. So the One had 12 filler sounds per minute. And then they did the same with words. So like would be, filler, so.
As if,
maybe. And they did the same, 2 fillers words, 5 filler words per minute, and 12 filler words per minute. So those are the different video variations. Everything else is the same clothes, same content of the speech, same eye contact, same gestures. And this was really meant to sort of mimic what would be considered fluent speech, what would be considered low rates of filler sounds and words, what would be mean rates, which is about 5, and what would be high rates, which they capped at about 12. And randomly, as a participant, you would just get into one group. They'd say, watch one of these speeches and then rate the speaker. Only focus on the speaker's ability. Don't worry about the content of the speech. Although one of the questions was a little bit based on what's in this speech. The survey wouldn't let you take the survey until 3 minutes had passed in case people just wanted to skip ahead and just start clicking on things, which why participate in research if you're not interested in participating in the research? I don't know, but probably good to put in there just in case. And then they'd watch the video. They'd watch Matthew do his talk at some rate of disfluency, and then they rate with an agreement or disagreement with each of the statements on these 15 different items related to speech fluency, which would be things like how fluent, how many filler sounds, how many filler words. You agree, disagree with, there were a lot. There were, vocal cues, which would be things like, did the speaker project? How was the speaking rate? Did the speaker sound out of breath? Confidence, which would include ratings around, did they seem comfortable, nervous? Did they seem confident? Bodily cues, which included, did the speaker give eye contact, use gestures? And then the speech structure. Was there a thesis or purpose of the speech? Did they give an introduction and conclusion? Did they progress nicely through the speech? And then finally, just overall performance. And all of these were on a 6-point Likert scale related to agreement with all 15 of those areas. They did a whole lot of data analysis, box and whisker plots. They talk about terrifying box and whisker plots, QQ plots, kurtosis scores for skewness and kurtosis, a manova and an anova. Ooh. A manova is an anova, but it's been bitten by another manova. And when the full moon comes out, it turns into a manova, you see, and terrorizes the countryside.
Thank you for mansplaining manova.
I mansplained that. And of course, the post hoc Tukey test, which I think of as more of a Thanksgiving statistic,
Right. Well, first you have the manova season, then you move on to the Tukey test.
But basically, all of this boiled down to, hey, when we look at the speech disfluency rates, did it affect perceived public speaking efficacy in terms of significance? And are there any significant differences between the different groups that were participating in the study? Because, like I said, they did a lot of demographic study. So the results. Speech disfluencies did significantly affect perceived public speaking variables in areas related to ratings on fluency, filler sounds, filler words, which you'd expect because they used different filler sounds and filler word rates, projection, speaker rate, how comfortable the speaker was, how nervous the speaker was, how confident, eye contact, thesis purpose, introduction, conclusion, which has nothing to do with whether or not the speaker was fluent or disfluent, right? The content was exactly the same, the progression of the speech, and then overall performance. So even for things that were not changed per video, if you used a certain number of disfluencies, you would have a significant impact on how people rated your speech. So there is a level of importance. However, the interesting piece comes next. Speakers were perceived as less fluent as those rates of filler sounds and words increased. And it wasn't just across the board the same. Filler sounds actually had a larger mean difference in rating than the filler words as both increased in rate. So again, it seems like if you're using more filler words, even as the rate of filler words you use increases, while the overall perception goes down, it's not as bad as if you use an increased rate of filler sounds. So if you used 12 filler sounds per minute, people rated you as less comfortable and more nervous. If you used between 5 and 12 sounds, people perceived you as less confident. But only when you got to the 12 filler words per minute would people start seeing you'd see a significant difference in ratings on confidence. 12 filler sounds per minute was needed for anyone to really make a significant perception of, hey, this person's not making as much eye contact as I think is good.
Which is every 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's a lot. Actually, that's faster. You would be perceived as less effective, or it seemed like statistically there's a difference in rating for less effective at communicating your thesis purpose, your intro and outro usage, your transitioning between ideas clearly, only at 12 filler sounds per minute. And there was a significant difference in the perception of your overall ability in speech at 5 and 12 filler sounds per minute, but only at 12 filler words. So if you increase the amount of disfluency in your speaking style, you do start getting lower and lower perceived raters among a number of public speaker categories. However, it really seems to be for some of the ratings that sounds at a moderate level make a difference, but sometimes it's only at a much higher rate. And a lot of times filler words didn't seem to make an impact until you got to that high 12 filler words per minute rate. Also, so in kind of some conclusions, trying to have no disfluency seems really unnecessary. If you are using ums and uhs, or you're using like and so at a low rate of disfluency, nobody seems to care. Or at least in this study, the ratings of effectiveness on a number of ratings of public speaking did not seem to matter very much. 12 filler sounds or words, though, is probably where you start having problems. You may start having problems with your ratings at 5 filler sounds per minute, but again, even that is not consistent across all of the public speaking raters. So if you are going to decrease your disfluencies, really filler sounds is where you need to be, unless you are using terms like, so, like, constantly in your speech. It may be the difference here. They kind of hypothesize that filler words might just sound more natural, or we use them more regularly so that people are just used to them. They habituate to them. Or a lot of filler words we use tend to be considered transitional phrases. So like, and then I give an example.
You don't pick up on it unless you've listened to that person talk a long time. Exactly. Frankly, they're more difficult to notice.
Well, apparently it's true. So you can see an impact in ratings. So it's not that disfluency is of no value, because even when you keep everything else the same, just speaking at a disfluent rate with filler sounds especially, you do start seeing a decrease in ratings that have nothing to do with the speech you are giving. So your introduction and conclusion is exactly the same, but people seem to think it's kind of crummy when you are engaged in that like 12 sounds per minute, filled sounds per minute. They don't really know exactly where the rate. So kind of a great follow-up study would be, where does that rate actually matter? Is it like 8? It's kind of between 5 and 12, right? Is it 9 or 10 disfluencies per minute? You can probably really drill down and find like, this is the number of disfluencies you want to be below to be considered a good public speaker. If you have a good speech and you do all the other pieces, like you use gestures, good eye contact. And the other piece, we said we'd come back to those demographics. This study was about 50-50 individuals who identified as male or female. So this is really a study of what is an appropriate amount of disfluency for a white male speaker in his late 20s, because that's who gave the speech. And it's unclear, would this be the same type of rating if you were a speaker of a different ethnicity, if you were a speaker of a different gender, or, so age. So there are a lot of factors that you need to take in. It's not necessarily like this is true for everybody. So we would need to replicate this with other groups to see, is this true? And then does the perception change based on who is the listener, which I would think it probably does to some extent, because that tends to be a source of things like, where we see a lot of microaggressions, the same a different individual saying the same thing could be perceived very differently based on someone's learning history and, experience with people that are, different groups than they are. So I'd love to see more research. And hey, why don't you do both? Do the where does disfluency matter and a bunch of different speakers.
So I just looked up my stats on a recently recorded talk. Mm-hmm. And I had a 1.3 filler words per minute, according to Zoom.
Oh, so nobody cared. No, so that's not going to impact. Well, it might, because you're not a male, or you don't.
We don't know.
So right? We don't know.
We don't know.
We would think it probably doesn't matter.
It says I talked too fast, 176 words per minute.
She's Gilmore Girling it.
I had a lot to say.
Well, that wasn't in the ratings here. You'd have to look at other ratings. And then finally, the big question that I always have of, we look at all these different ratings of public speaking effectiveness, and you could have someone rated as, this is the best public speaker I've ever seen in my life. But does it actually matter if you're good at public speaking? Does it change audience behavior? So what's the important measure there? Is it just, I want to see that speaker again? I think of Pat Fryman at Babbitt. Everyone wants to see Pat Fryman again. He's a great public speaker. But did it change our behavior as behavior analysts? So is there an impact that goes beyond just he is entertaining to listen to? I mean, I would think so. I've certainly used a lot of the anecdotes he's had. It's changed some of the ways I've thought of, contextual behavior, right? But I don't know if that's true for everybody. How many people does it need to be true for to say you are definitively a good public speaker? So we still have a lot of things that we want to be studying to make sure that we are coming up with socially valid treatments to improve public speaking. So while I think we can continue to work on a couple areas of public speaking for improvement, we still don't know everything. So if someone comes and says, I'll make you a better public speaker, they don't 100% know exactly what that needs to be. So you don't have to fire them or anything, but don't necessarily believe all of what they're selling you. Especially if they just care about your filler words. You can tell them, no, don't need to change that, I think. But maybe you do, because you might be a different demographic group with different results. We don't know.
It's good to know that you can have a few and it doesn't ding your credibility.
Oh, man, it makes me so excited because I know I say occasionally, and every time it feels like a dagger in my heart, but I don't think it's that high. It's definitely less than 12 per minute.
Right.
So that's
all right, super
that's Laske and DiGennaro Reed. Ooh. It's like the beginning. It's so scary because you're like, I don't know. Am I going to make too many ums and uhs? And then at the end, you realize it's okay to have some. And we all learned an important lesson. So it's less scary now. Well, we hope you are not too terrified by all of our research because we've come to the end of the show. We don't have a dissemination station because what was the theme?
Spooky.
Wolves, speaking wolves and AB graphs. AB graphs around wolves and their public speaking ability. There's a study for you. So we'll just kind of get to the end. We don't do, did you want to do a pairings for this one, Diana? No pairings at all.
We have to go.
We have to go. All right, everybody. That brings the end of our episode. Let's give you that second secret code word. It is treat. TREAT. And if you have any Halloween fun, we hope you get some yummy Halloween treats. TREAT. No tricks.
I think it will have happened by the time.
It will have happened by now.
Hopefully you had a fun one.
Oh, does it? Okay, I can't remember when we record these things. Anyway, we hope you did. Have a fun one. We also want to remind everybody that you can find us all over the place online. You can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. You can join us on our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to these articles, as well as places to purchase CEs. And you can always come over to and subscribe on our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can get access for as low as $5 a month to our episodes a week ahead of time, as well as a chance to vote on our book clubs and our quarterly listener podcasts. If you want to subscribe at the $10 and up level, you get a lot of free episodes, including those special book club 2-hour length shows. We have one on the science of consequences coming up to wrap up the fall season. So you don't want to miss those. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Some final thanks. Thanks to you, the listener. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We will be back next.
I didn't want to say, thanks to Dan Thabit.
No.
Podcast Doctors.
I don't want to tempt fate on my disfluencies. just because there's some good research doesn't mean I should get sloppy.
Okay.
Anyway, I just did one too. I did it. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.